$200. That's all Mia Pierce had left in the world when Derek Collins, her landlord and the man whose fists had broken her ribs 3 years ago, gave her 5 days to find $150,000. 5 days. $150,000. $200 in her wallet. The math didn't lie, and neither did the notice taped to her apartment door in bold red letters. Eviction. November 15th. Loss of custody if she couldn't pay. The November rain fell like a curse, cold and punishing, as Mia Pierce stood in an alley near the warehouse district of Philadelphia at 11:47 at night. Her thrift store coat, gray and paper-thin, was already soaked through. Water ran down her face, mixing with something darker, something red. 3 armed men surrounded a merchant backed against the brick wall, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold them up. The lead attacker, tattoos crawling up both sides of his neck like vines strangling a tree, held a knife with a blade that caught the neon light from the street corner 3 blocks away. "Please," the merchant said. His voice cracked like old glass. "Please, I have nothing." "You have everything," the attacker said. "You just don't know it yet." Mia watched from 10 feet away. She didn't know why she was still standing there. She didn't know why her feet wouldn't move towards safety, toward the diner on the corner where she'd been finishing a double shift for minimum wage and no tips. She should have walked past this alley. Should have kept her head down. Should have gone home to Oliver, her 8-year-old son, sleeping on a mattress in a bedroom that wasn't theirs anymore, that belonged to a man who would throw them both into the street in 5 days. But she saw herself in the merchant's face. Terrified. Defenseless. Invisible. "Walk away, lady." The attacker's eyes flicked to her for half a second. "This isn't your business." Mia stepped closer. "I said walk away." She stepped closer again. The merchant's eyes widened. He shook his head, a silent plea for her to leave, to save herself. She had learned, years ago, that nobody saved people like her. Nobody intervened. Nobody stopped the violence. She stepped closer anyway. The knife flashed upward, aimed at the merchant's throat. Mia twisted without thinking, her body moving on instinct alone, and the blade meant for his neck sliced across her ribs instead. The pain arrived later. First came the sensation of fabric tearing, then the cold shock of air on exposed skin, then the fire. Blood bloomed dark against the wet fabric of her coat, spreading like spilled wine on a tablecloth. She gasped. Stumbled. But didn't fall. From the shadows across the street, a man watched. Rafael Calabrese was 6'2" with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, his tailored charcoal suit worth more than everything Mia Pierce owned, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his eyes the color of a winter sky before a storm. A scar ran from the corner of his right eye to his cheekbone, pale and thin like a scratch from a demon's fingernail. He held a cigarette between his fingers, smoke curling into the rain, and in 15 years of building an empire from blood and loyalty codes, Rafael had never once looked away from violence. But he looked away from everything else. Always. Tonight, he watched a woman with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes do something no one in his world would ever do. She saved a stranger. She did it for nothing. She did it knowing she would bleed. The merchant ran. His feet splashed through the puddles, and he disappeared into the darkness without looking back. The 3 attackers stood frozen for one long second, realizing they had just stabbed a witness, a stranger who could testify, a problem they didn't know how to solve. Then they saw Rafael step forward from the shadows, saw Marco and Nino materialize beside him like ghosts made flesh, and ran in the opposite direction, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls and fading into the distance. Mia pressed her hand to her ribs and sank against the wall. The brick was cold. The rain was colder. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she couldn't tell if it was blood loss or despair or just the weight of a woman who had been drowning for so long she'd forgotten what air tasted like. Rafael approached slowly. His men stayed back, understanding without words that this moment belonged to him alone. His shoes made no sound on the wet pavement. The rain fell around him like he had commanded it to, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked up at the most dangerous man in Philadelphia and tried to stand. Her legs didn't obey. She slid back down the wall, leaving a red smear on the brick. "I'm fine," she whispered. Rafael had not felt anything in 3 years. 3 years since he'd walked out of a hospital nursery and never returned. 3 years since grief had wrapped around his chest like chains and convinced him that numbness was a mercy. His empire ran on his cold certainty, his refusal to be moved by anything. His men feared him because he didn't fear, didn't hesitate, didn't break. But something cracked inside his chest as he watched this bleeding stranger refuse to let herself fall. Something that had been dead for 1,000 days suddenly remembered what it meant to be alive. Marco appeared beside him, a man in his 50s with grey threading through his dark hair and scars on his knuckles from decades of loyalty. "We need to move her. Hospital. Now." Rafael didn't answer. He was watching Mia's hand press harder against the wound, watching her bite her lip to keep from crying out, watching her eyes stay fixed on some point in the distance like she was looking at something beyond this alley, beyond this rain, beyond this life. "We need to move her," Marco repeated. "Yes," Rafael said quietly. "We do." Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. We're about to see what brings a man like this to his knees. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 5 days earlier, to the moment when Mia Pierce's entire world was about to collapse. That evening, the wind was different. Sharper. Like a blade wrapped in ice. Mia stood outside a corner diner on 7th Street, the rain beginning to fall. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were always the worst because tips were scarce and her manager, a man named Victor who always smelled like cigarettes and disappointment, scheduled her for the shift nobody wanted. Midnight to 7 in the morning. 12 hours of pouring coffee for insomniacs and truck drivers passing through the city, watching the clock move like it was running backward, knowing that every hour brought her closer to a deadline she couldn't escape. Her coat was the same grey thrift store coat. Her shoes had holes in both soles. Her hair, once a rich brown, was now streaked with premature grey at the temples. She was 29 years old but looked decades older, the kind of age that comes from sleeping wrong, eating wrong, and worrying so hard you forget what your face looks like when it isn't afraid. $200. That's what remained in her wallet after she paid the electric bill. $200 to last until Friday. It wouldn't last. It never lasted. Across the street, a car pulled up to the curb. A black Mercedes with windows so dark you couldn't see inside. The passenger door opened, and Derek Collins stepped out onto the wet pavement. He was 53 years old, with slicked back hair the color of motor oil and a face that had been handsome once, before cruelty had settled into the lines around his mouth and made him look like something that crawled out of the earth. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal, tailored, $1,000 at least, and a gold ring on every finger. When he smiled at Mia, his teeth were too white, too perfect, too much like a predator's. Mia's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen Derek in months, not since the restraining order she'd filed was denied on a technicality, not since he'd signed the papers making him her landlord after he bought the building. That's how the system worked. Money bought everything. Money bought justice. Money bought the right to hurt people and walk away clean. "Mia," Derek said, walking toward her. His footsteps were measured, unhurried, the gait of a man who had never had to rush from anything in his life. "We need to talk." "I paid November's rent," she said immediately. Her voice came out like a trembling candle in the wind. "It's in your account." "I have the receipt." "You paid November's rent," Derek agreed. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, expensive and suffocating. "But you didn't pay the repairs. The foundation. The roof. The plumbing that your son destroyed by jamming the toilet. That was a child's mistake." "I paid for the plumber." "You paid $50 of a $300 bill," Derek interrupted. "And that's just one repair. The roof is crumbling. The windows are rotting. The foundation is settling. Do you know how much it costs to fix a foundation, Mia? Have you ever looked it up? $150,000. Minimum. That's what you owe me to remain in that apartment. $150,000. The numbers didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. $150,000 might as well be $1 million. Might as well be $1 trillion. It was a number so far removed from her reality that it felt like Derek was speaking a language from another planet. I don't have that kind of money, she heard herself say. The word sounded small and broken. I know you don't, Derek said, and smiled. That's why I'm giving you 5 days to find it. 5 days, Mia. After that, I'm filing for eviction, and I'm filing for emergency custody of Oliver because any court in this city would agree that a mother who can't afford to maintain a safe living space has no business raising a child. He turned and walked back to his car. The passenger door opened. The car pulled away from the curb, and then he was gone, leaving Mia standing in the rain with $200 in her wallet and 5 days to save her son. The sound of the car's engine faded into the distance. The November rain fell harder, colder, each drop hitting her face like a small accusation. She had no idea that in an alley 5 blocks away, a man was about to change her life. She didn't know that her 5 days of desperation were about to intersect with something far more dangerous than she could imagine. She only knew that she was out of time, out of money, and out of options. And that Oliver was sleeping in a bed that wasn't theirs anymore, in a home that belonged to a man who wanted to take him away. The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Mia Pierce counted the money in her pocket for the 3rd time that afternoon. $200. The bills were wrinkled, worn soft from being folded and unfolded, handled with the desperate mathematics of someone who had learned to make nothing stretch into something. $200. She sat in a cracked vinyl booth at Sullivan's Diner on the corner of 5th and Market, the same booth where she had worked the morning shift until noon, the same booth where Derek Collins had found her yesterday with an eviction notice folded in his hand like a blade. The coffee in front of her had gone cold an hour ago. She hadn't drunk it. The cup was just something to hold, something that made her look like a customer instead of a woman drowning, something that let her stay at the table without the waitress asking if she wanted to order anything else. She couldn't afford anything else. $75 for Oliver's school field trip before Friday. $60 for groceries to last another week, though the math on that had never worked and never would. $32 in the electric bill that arrived this morning, red stamped letters spelling out final notice in the corner. That left $1. $1 to her name for everything else that might break, everything else that might cost, everything else that might need her. The eviction notice lay on the table beside the cold coffee. She had memorized every word, every number, the handwriting that made her stomach turn. Derek Collins. His signature covered the bottom of the page, the same signature she had seen on loan documents 8 years ago when he first offered to consolidate Tom's debts. The same signature on the medical bills he had bought from the hospital when the cancer came and Tom's paycheck stopped and the debts had started multiplying like a curse that could not be erased. $42,000. Underground poker games, the kind that happened in basements and warehouse back rooms where men like Tom went when their marriages felt too small and their lives felt too ordinary and they needed to feel something dangerous. $30,000 more to loan sharks whose names Tom had never told her but whose men showed up at their apartment twice, demanding payment, their voices like gravel and broken glass. $78,000 in hospital bills. Cancer of the pancreas. 8 months from diagnosis to death. 8 months of watching her husband shrink, watching his skin turn gray then yellow then something that didn't have a color anymore because he had stopped being a person and started being a problem. A problem with a medical bill attached. A problem that Derek Collins had purchased for pennies on the dollar from a hospital billing department that didn't care if the patient was alive or dead, only that the debt existed and someone should pay it. $150,000 total. That's what Derek had told her yesterday when he showed up at the apartment with his tailored suit that cost more than her rent, his gold watch catching the light from the living room window, his smile like a shark that had smelled blood in the water. $150,000 minimum to stay. $150,000 or he files for eviction and he files for emergency custody of Oliver because any judge in Philadelphia would agree that a mother who can't afford to maintain a safe living space has no business raising a child. 5 days. That's what he had given her. 5 days to find money that didn't exist, to save her son from a man whose hands had left bruises on her shoulders for 3 years, bruises she hid under sweaters and long sleeves, bruises that arrived after Tom passed out drunk upstairs, after Derek had pushed into their kitchen with that particular look in his eyes that meant payment was due and Tom was useless and she would have to be the currency instead. The waitress passed by. Mia pulled the eviction notice close, folded it, slipped it back into her coat pocket where it felt like a stone, like a weight that was slowly drowning her. The waitress didn't ask if she needed anything. The waitress knew Mia. The waitress had worked enough double shifts with her to understand that some people didn't come to diners to eat. They came to sit. They came to breathe air that was warm. They came to count their money in a place where the heat was free. At 2:30, Oliver's dismissal bell would ring at Philadelphia Elementary School, 4th floor, room for 12. He would walk down the hallway holding the hand of Ms. Chen, his teacher, because Oliver never let go of the railing going downstairs, still afraid of falling even though he was 8 years old and knew better than to be afraid. He had been afraid since Tom died. Not the kind of fear that children grow out of. The kind of fear that had soaked into his bones and settled there like a permanent thing. Mia stood. She left $3 on the table for the cold coffee, which was more generous than she could afford but less generous than it should have been. Her coat hung from a hook by the window, navy blue wool from 6 years ago, fraying at the cuffs but still whole, still capable of keeping out the November cold that had started cutting through Philadelphia like a blade wrapped in ice. The rain was heavier when she stepped outside. It fell in sheets, in walls, in the kind of steady downpour that made the city look like it was drowning from the inside out. Puddles collected on the sidewalk, dark mirrors reflecting neon signs flickering to life on Market Street, the afternoon already fading into evening even though it was only 2:45. She pulled her coat around her shoulders and started walking toward the school, taking the route that cut through the warehouse district, the shortcut that saved her 12 minutes, and 12 minutes was 12 minutes closer to Oliver. The streets here were different. No shop windows, no people, no life except for the occasional car pulling in or out of a loading dock. Brick walls stretched upward, cracked and water-stained, covered in spray paint that said things like ghost and mercy and other words that looked like prayers written by hands that had given up. The rain sounded different here too. It echoed off the high walls, created small rivers that ran down the gutters, filled the alley with the sound of water that had nowhere else to go. She was 2 blocks from the school when she heard the voices. Angry voices. Male voices raised in a kind of heated argument that made the back of her neck go tight. She slowed. The voices came from an alley between 2 warehouse buildings, the kind of alley where you didn't look, where you didn't listen, where you walked past with your eyes on the ground and your pace increased and your heart rate elevated. Mia had learned not to get involved in other people's suffering. She had learned that looking took energy. She had learned that stopping to help was a luxury that women like her, women with $200 and 5 days and an 8-year-old son, simply could not afford. Survival was a narrow path and looking to the left or right meant losing your balance. But the voices were getting louder. And underneath the argument, she heard something else. Desperation. Fear. The sound of a man who knew he was about to lose something he was not willing to lose. She stopped walking. The rain fell on her face, cold, each drop hitting like a small accusation. She could see the alley's mouth maybe 20 feet ahead, see the shape of bodies, see what looked like 3 men in expensive suits surrounding a 4th man, a merchant maybe, someone with a storefront nearby, someone whose face had gone the color of ash. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking. Keep your head down. Get to Oliver. That's all that matters. That's the only equation that matters anymore. 1 mother plus 1 son equals everything worth keeping. But 8 years of Derek Collins's hands had taught her something else. It had taught her what it felt like to be alone when someone needed her. It had taught her what it felt like to watch your own destruction happen in slow motion and know that somewhere, someone had looked away. The rain kept falling. The voices kept escalating. And Mia Pierce, who had $200 to her name and 5 days to save her life, stepped toward the alley instead of away from it. She had no idea that in the shadows across the street, behind the rain and the falling darkness and the brick walls that seemed to swallow light, a man was watching. A man whose scars told their own story. A man named Rafael Calabrese, who had spent the last 15 years building an empire out of cruelty and control and the simple fact that other men would do anything if you paid them enough or hurt them enough or both. She had no idea that her 5 days of desperation were about to intersect with something far more dangerous than mathematics. She had no idea that stepping into that alley would be the moment everything changed. The rain kept falling on Mia's face as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step a small victory against the weight in her chest. Her side throbbed where the knife had gone in, where Rafael's doctor had stitched her back together in a bedroom that smelled like leather and old money. Oliver was asleep when she opened the door, his small body curled under a blanket that had more holes than fabric, his drawing of their family still taped to the refrigerator with a piece of tape so old it had turned brown. She sat on the edge of his bed and watched him breathe, counted each exhale like it was a prayer, like if she stayed awake long enough she could keep him safe through sheer force of will. By morning, everything had changed again. The eviction notice came slipped under the door at 6 in the morning, typed in that cold bureaucratic font that made desperation sound like procedure. 5 days, it said. Derek Collins had decided he was done waiting. The grocery bag from the anonymous donor sat on her counter, fresh vegetables, whole milk, bread that wasn't the cheapest brand, and she stared at it like it was evidence of a crime she'd committed. Rafael's $5,000 was hidden in her underwear drawer, but even that number felt small when the number on the eviction notice was $150,000. She called in sick to the diner, something she never did, something she couldn't afford to do. But Derek was waiting outside her building when she'd gone down yesterday, his smile all teeth, his hands in his pockets like he was trying not to use them. The driver from Rafael's car, one of his men, though she still didn't know his name, had appeared in the doorway and Derek had left. That small mercy wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. Mia dressed Oliver for school, braided his hair into the style he liked, made him toast with the new butter that tasted like abundance. He chatted about his field trip, about the art museum and the planetarium, and she realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't know about the eviction notice. He didn't know that in 5 days they might be living in her car, if the car didn't get repossessed first. "Mommy, you're squeezing too hard," Oliver said, and she loosened her grip on his shoulder, forced her face into the shape of a smile. The school was 6 blocks away. She walked him there in the pale morning light, and only when she turned to leave did she notice Marco, Rafael's lieutenant, standing by the gates reading a newspaper. He didn't look at her. But she saw him see her son, saw something shift in his expression, gone before she could name it. That night, standing in her apartment with the eviction notice on the table and $217 in her checking account, she'd recounted it 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. Mia made a decision. She called the number on Rafael's card. A woman's voice answered, professional, asking what she needed. Mia gave her name and waited. The silence stretched like taffy. Then Marco's voice, gravelly and older than she expected. "Where are you?" She told him. He said, "Stay there," and hung up before she could protest. 20 minutes later, a black sedan appeared outside her building. Nino got out, the younger one with a scar bisecting his eyebrow. He didn't speak, just gestured for her to follow. She glanced up at her apartment window where Oliver was asleep, where Mrs. Chen from next door was watching him, a woman who'd offered kindness before Rafael Calabrese existed in her life, which meant she could be trusted. The restaurant called Calabrese's was closed to the public, lights off except for a soft glow from the back. Nino walked her through the empty dining room, past tables set for tomorrow's service, past the bar where the bottles caught the light like amber and topaz. Rafael was in the kitchen. Just Rafael and Marco, no other men, which meant something. It meant this wasn't business. It meant something else. He wore a white chef's coat, sleeves pushed up, and for a moment she saw him different, not as the man in the black coat watching from shadows, but as someone who knew how to create things instead of just destroy them. He was slicing basil, the knife moving with the efficiency of muscle memory. Derek Collins called me, Rafael said, not looking up. The knife continued its rhythm against the cutting board. He says you owe him money. He says you're his property. Mia's mouth went dry. I'm not property. Rafael looked at her then, and the knife stopped moving. No. You're not. He set the blade down carefully. What did he take from you? The question was simple. The answer broke something open in her chest. She told him about Tom, her husband, about his gambling and his cancer diagnosis in the same month the medical bills started arriving. She told him about Derek being Tom's friend, about how that friendship had transformed into something else after Tom died, how Derek had become a creditor and then something worse, a hand that wouldn't stop reaching. She told him about the scars on her ribs, on her shoulders, on the backs of her thighs where nobody would see them. Marco had stopped polishing glasses. Nino had vanished into the back. It was just her and Rafael and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I can't help you, she said finally. I know what you're thinking, but I can't. Whatever this is, whatever you think you owe me for the alley, it's not enough. Nothing's enough. Rafael began to cook. He moved around the kitchen like a man who'd been trained in elegance, who understood that food was a language. He made pasta from scratch, boiling water and salt, creating a sauce from tomatoes and garlic and basil he'd just cut. The smell filled the room like something holy. Sit, he said, and she sat because she was too tired to refuse. He placed the plate in front of her. Pappardelle with a sauce that had simmered long enough to taste like time itself. Steam rose from the bowl. She picked up the fork and her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it. When my wife was alive, she used to take food to people in the neighborhood, Rafael said, standing across from her. His voice was different now, quieter, like he was speaking from underwater. People with nothing. People everyone else had written off. She said that being seen, being fed, that mattered. That sometimes it was the only thing that kept a person alive. Mia took a bite. The taste made her eyes water. She died 3 years ago, he continued. Our son was born premature. 20 minutes. He stopped, and the pain in the room thickened. I haven't cooked for anyone since. Not until you. The fork fell from Mia's hand. It clattered against the plate, and the sound was loud as a gunshot in the closed restaurant. She thought about stepping in front of a knife for a stranger. She thought about Rafael watching from the shadows, his own scars, his own losses. She thought about how grief recognized grief, how the broken could see pieces of themselves in other broken people. What was his name? She whispered. Luca, Rafael said, and when he said it she heard everything he hadn't said in 3 years. 3 blocks away, in an upscale apartment building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Center City, Evelyn Blackwell was making phone calls. His first was to Derek Collins, a man he'd been monitoring for months, waiting for the right leverage point. The woman my uncle is protecting, I want her destroyed. Publicly. And I want you to help me. His second call was to a journalist at the Philadelphia Tribune, a woman hungry for scandal, hungry for a story that would make her career. I have something for you. A corruption angle. Someone in this city's underworld is breaking the rules, and I know exactly how to prove it. His third call took longer. He was arranging surveillance, hiring investigators, building a case that would paint Mia Pierce as either a criminal or a fool, and either way would destroy her credibility and isolate Rafael from his own organization. But at that moment, Mia was eating pasta in a closed restaurant, and Rafael was telling her about his wife's name, which was Elena, and how she'd sung while she cooked. He was telling her things he'd never told anyone, things his men didn't know, things that lived in the locked part of his heart. When she left the restaurant at 3 in the morning, dawn breaking gold and pink over the rain-soaked streets, Marco walked her to the car. He hasn't been like this since she died, Marco said quietly. In 15 years working for him, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you. It's not like that, Mia said. No, Marco agreed. It's worse. It's deeper. Which means you need to be careful. Because the people who love Rafael Calabrese learn very quickly that love, in his world, is a weapon. And weapons get used. She rode home in silence, the driver's eyes meeting hers in the mirror once, then looking away. Oliver was still asleep when she got there, his small hand reaching across the bed for her even in dreams. She lay down beside him and held him like he was the last thing tethering her to earth. 3 days left on the eviction notice. 3 days to find a way out that didn't exist. The roof of the apartment building stretched empty under November rain, the city bleeding neon and shadow below. Mia Pierce stood at the edge, her clothes soaked through, water streaming down her face indistinguishable from tears. 3 days left. 3 days until Derek's eviction, until Oliver lost the only home he remembered, until everything she had fought to protect crumbled into nothing. She pulled out her phone. Derek's number was still there, still saved, still waiting. One call. That was all it took to erase the debt, to keep her son, to survive. All she had to do was betray Rafael Calabrese. All she had to do was destroy the only person who had ever treated her like she mattered. Her finger hovered over the green button. Then she looked down through her apartment window. 1 floor below. Oliver's nightlight glowed like a small star, the rocket ship lamp Tom had bought years ago, before the cancer took him, before Derek's fists came, before everything turned to ash. Oliver was sleeping, his stuffed animal clutched to his chest, one hand reaching across the bed toward where she always lay. Mia's hand dropped. She deleted the call, turned back toward the stairs, and found Marco sitting in the hallway outside her door. His expensive suit was casual now, his presence heavy with purpose. "Boss sent me," Marco said quietly. "Said you might need company." Mia broke. Everything she had held together for 8 years shattered in that hallway. She told Marco about Derek's ultimatum, about Evelyn's involvement, about the choice between destroying Rafael or losing her son. The words poured out like blood from an open wound. Marco listened without interrupting, his dark eyes fixed on hers. When she finished, he made one phone call. "It's time," he said simply, and hung up. Across the city, Rafael Calabrese was in his study, the door to Luca's nursery cracked open for the first time in 3 years. Not much. Just an inch. But it was open. His phone rang. Marco's voice, "It's time." Rafael closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come. He had known from the night Mia saved that merchant's life that Derek Collins would make a final move, would overreach, would force Rafael's hand. He had been waiting. Preparing. His men had been positioning themselves for weeks. 12 men in black moved like ghosts through Philadelphia's streets at 11 p.m. Derek Collins sat in his office counting cash when the doors locked behind them. He looked up, saw Marco and Nino flanking the entrance, saw the way they had positioned themselves to block every exit, and his stomach dropped. "You made a mistake," Rafael said, walking in alone. His voice was quiet, level, the voice of a man who had decided your fate long before this conversation began. Derek scrambled backward, his false courage crumbling. "She's nobody to you." "Just some." Rafael moved faster than Derek's eyes could track. One hand grabbed Derek's throat and slammed him against the desk. Cash scattered across the floor like leaves in a hurricane. "Say her name," Rafael whispered. "I want to hear you say it before I destroy you." Derek's voice came out strangled. "Please. Please, it was Evelyn's idea. He paid me. I'll give it back. All of it. The money." Rafael's smile was arctic, without warmth, without mercy. This was never about the money. Nino entered holding a tablet. Every transaction Derek had made in 8 years appeared on the screen. Illegal loans. Bribes. Assault charges buried by corrupt lawyers. The full architecture of his corruption, meticulously documented. "The FBI receives these files in 1 hour," Rafael said, "unless you give me a reason not to send them." Derek's face went ashen. His hand shook as he signed the documents Marco placed in front of him. Mia Pierce's debt. Erased. Every contract, every note, every record. Gone. Rafael made Derek call her on speakerphone, made him apologize for everything while 2 FBI agents Rafael had on payroll witnessed every word. Is this real? Mia's confused voice came through the speaker. Derek could barely speak. It's real. You're free. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. He was crying when they left him there alone. The second target required different precision. Evelyn Blackwell stood in the grand ballroom of the Blackwell estate, champagne in hand, surrounded by Philadelphia's elite. He was preparing to announce his exposé tonight, the photographs already queued up on hidden servers, Mia's image entering Rafael's properties ready to be projected onto every screen in the room. Manufactured evidence of money laundering. A narrative designed to destroy her credibility and isolate Rafael from his own organization. The lights went dark at exactly 10 p.m. When they came back up, every screen in the ballroom showed the same footage. Evelyn's private files. His offshore account siphoning money from family businesses. His payments to Derek Collins. His hired investigators' notes used the kid as leverage. Destroy her to hurt Rafael. And then the video. Evelyn drunk at a private club 2 weeks ago, bragging to friends. I'll take everything from my uncle. That bleeding heart widow is the perfect weapon. By next month she'll be in prison and Rafael will be completely isolated. The ballroom went silent. A silence like a coffin lid closing. Evelyn's face drained of all color. This is fake. Someone hacked. His mother, Vivian Blackwell, stood from her table. Her expression was murderous. Cold. Final. You're no longer part of this family. Get out. Over the next hour, as Evelyn stumbled through denials and accusations, the dominoes fell like a calculated avalanche. The Philadelphia Tribune published the full story by midnight. Not about Rafael. About Evelyn. The video went viral within 30 minutes. #Blackwell scandal was trending by 1 a.m. The FBI arrived at dawn to question him about the offshore accounts, about the fraud, about 8 years of embezzlement hidden behind charity galas and family money. His trust fund froze by family order. His position in the business terminated. His reputation destroyed on live television and social media simultaneously. He wasn't arrested immediately, the investigation would take 18 months, but the result was already certain. 40 years federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. But right now, in this moment, he was something worse than imprisoned. He was nobody. Publicly humiliated. Completely powerless. Exactly what he had tried to make Mia pierce. Rafael watched the news coverage from his study, the early morning light casting long shadows across mahogany and leather. Luca's nursery door remained open. Just an inch. But it was open. Marco knocked and entered. It's done. Both of them. Derek's gone. Evelyn's finished. Rafael nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And Mia? Doesn't know you were involved. Thinks the FBI investigation was coincidental. Derek's being arraigned this afternoon. The debt is wiped clean. Good, Rafael said softly. Keep it that way. When Mia woke that morning, her phone was ringing. It was the bank. Derek Collins's attorney had submitted documents canceling the entire debt. $150,000. Gone. The eviction notice was no longer valid. She and Oliver could stay. She sank to her knees in the kitchen, holding the phone to her ear, unable to speak. Oliver appeared in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Mommy? Are you crying? Happy tears, baby, she whispered. Just happy tears. 3 months later, spring arrived in Philadelphia like a whispered apology. The November rain that had soaked the city for so long finally retreated, leaving behind wet streets that reflected the first real warmth in months. Mia Pierce stood in her kitchen, not the cramped studio Derek had controlled, but a real apartment with sunlight streaming through windows that actually opened. She didn't know Rafael's people had arranged it. She only knew that somehow, after the FBI arrest, after the court dates, after Derek's name became synonymous with federal fraud, a job had appeared. Managing the community center. $42,000 a year. Benefits. A future. Oliver's drawing hung on the refrigerator next to his school pictures. 3 figures holding hands, Mia, Oliver, and a tall man in a dark coat. When she'd asked Oliver who the third person was, he'd shrugged with the casual honesty of 8-year-olds. The guy who makes you smile, he'd said, and returned to his cereal. That morning, Mia braided her hair and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back still had tired eyes, but they were no longer hollow. The scars on her back still existed, mapped across her shoulders like a history she couldn't erase. But she no longer hid them. She wore sleeveless shirts now. She stood straighter. At the community center that afternoon, Mia taught a self-defense class for women. Survivors, mostly. Women who'd been told they were worthless, broken, beyond repair. She stood before them in tank top and jeans, turning slowly so they could see every mark. "This is what survival looks like," she said, her voice steady like a blade through air. "You don't have to be ashamed of what you endured to escape it. These scars are proof you fought back. They are proof you won." After the class filed out, Mia found an envelope on her desk. Cream-colored, expensive paper. No return address. Inside, a single handwritten line in ink that made her throat tighten. "Proud of you." The handwriting belonged to someone she hadn't allowed herself to think about too carefully. Rafael Calabrese. The next morning, as Mia walked Oliver to school, she saw Marco across the street like always. 3 months of this. The same position. The same patient vigilance. She crossed over, handing him a coffee she'd prepared. "You know I see you, right? Every morning for 3 months. I'm not blind." Marco accepted it with something that might have been a smile. "Boss's orders, Signora. Tell your boss I can protect my own son now. Tell him the debt is paid." Marco's expression shifted. "The boss doesn't see it as a debt. But if you want to tell him that yourself," he nodded toward the restaurant 3 blocks away. "He's been waiting for you to show up." That evening, Mia walked through Philadelphia's streets toward Calabrese's restaurant. Her hands were shaking, though she couldn't decide if it was anger or something else entirely. The door chimed as she entered. Rafael stood behind the bar, closing up, polishing a crystal glass with deliberate movements. He wore an open white shirt, the fabric catching the light. His expression was composed, but she saw it anyway, the way his entire body stilled when he looked at her. "You've been watching us," Mia said. "Not a question." Rafael set the glass down slowly. "Making sure you were safe." "From what?" "Derek's in federal prison. Evelyn's a punchline on late-night television. The men who threatened us are either arrested or disappeared." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I'm not, though, vulnerable anymore. I have a job. A real job that pays real money. Oliver's in a school where the teachers know his name. I rebuilt my life, Rafael. So why are you still protecting me?" The question hung between them like a held breath. Rafael didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched his throat work, watched his hands clench and release, watched something crack behind his eyes, the same look she'd seen that first night in the alley when she'd bled for a stranger. "Because," he finally said, his voice rough like gravel, "I couldn't admit what I felt until you proved you didn't need me anymore." Mia felt the words land like a blade, precise and deep. "The nursery. Did you ever go in?" she asked quietly. Rafael stiffened. "How did?" "Marco drinks whiskey. He talks when he drinks. He told me about Luca. Your son." She moved closer, and this time her voice carried no judgment, only gentleness. "I'm not saying you should forget. Just maybe forgive yourself for surviving when he didn't." She left before he could respond, before she had to see what her words might break open in him. But what she didn't witness was Rafael, alone in the restaurant after closing, finally walking toward the nursery door he'd kept locked for 3 years. Finally stepping inside the room where blue walls still held the ghost of his grief. Finally letting himself cry for the first time since the funeral. 6 months after the stabbing, summer transformed Philadelphia into a city of golden light and warm evenings. Oliver's 9th birthday party filled the community center with children laughing, women from Mia's self-defense class bringing dishes and conversation, Marco and Nino arriving with a cake so absurdly large it required 2 men to carry it. Mrs. Walsh from Oliver's school brought cupcakes. People who actually loved them. People who stayed. Oliver opened presents with the pure joy of childhood, and then the room's energy shifted. Rafael appeared in the doorway, holding a small box wrapped in blue paper. The conversation stilled. Oliver saw him and ran, crashing into Rafael's chest with the certainty of a child who knew he was safe. "You came," Oliver said. "I promised I would." Rafael knelt down, handing him the box. Inside was a rocket ship model, detailed and perfect, matching the one Oliver had on his nightlight. "Your mom told me you like space." Oliver hugged him without hesitation, and Mia watched something in Rafael's face shatter and reform, the careful walls he'd maintained for months finally giving way to something that looked like light. After everyone left, after the streamers came down and the last plate was washed, Mia and Rafael stood alone in the empty community center. The birthday decoration still hung overhead like a benediction. "I never thanked you," Mia said quietly. "For everything. The apartment, the job, Derek's arrest, Evelyn's humiliation, I know it was you. All of it." Rafael stepped closer. "You saved my life that night in the alley. Not from the knife that would have come next, though you did that too. You reminded me that courage still exists. That goodness isn't extinct." His voice dropped lower, thick with emotion. "I've spent 6 months protecting you because I couldn't admit the truth. But watching you become strong enough that you don't need me anymore, that's when I realized I need you." Mia's breath caught. "Not to save," he continued. "Not to fix. Just to stand beside. I love you, Mia Pierce. I loved you from the moment you stepped between those men and a stranger, when you bled for someone you didn't know. I loved you when you held Oliver and refused to let the world break you. I loved you when you rebuilt yourself into someone who teaches other women how to fight back." Tears were streaming down his face now, unstoppable, and Mia realized she was crying too. "I do," she whispered. "Feel the same. I think I have since you told me Luca's name." They kissed in the empty community center, surrounded by birthday decorations and the ghosts of who they used to be. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Mia Pierce had $200 and 5 days when her world collapsed. She was drowning in debts, hunted by men who saw her as property. But one act of courage, saving a stranger in the rain, changed everything. Not because she expected reward. Because kindness has power we cannot measure. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that courage matters, that kindness is never wasted. Subscribe so you don't miss the story coming tomorrow. Comment below, what would you have done in Mia's position? After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places.